The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
What better time than the summer if you're rich, right? I mean, beaches and jet skiing and golf and the power of being rich in the summer. Apparently not if you were Donald Trump Jr., who is reportedly miserable and can't wait for his dad to no longer be president of the United States. For a year, I have been saying Trump doesn't want this. Trump didn't want this. His family didn't want it. Melania didn't want it. And it really seems like that's the case. And a friend of both Don Jr. And Eric Trump told People magazine that neither of them ever wanted this at all. Quote, Don can't do any deals because he'll be overly scrutinized. He just goes to work every day and is miserable. Who is happy with this? I mean, you've got basically a shrinking group of ideologically committed Trumpists, I guess, because the Trump family seems miserable. Progressives are miserable. Moderates aren't happy. Actual conservatives aren't happy. And Trump himself is reportedly watching TV in the Oval Office as much as he can. And now with the news that Donald Trump Jr. is going to be dragged in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee to testify about his involvement in the Trump-Russia scandal, I get why he wouldn't be thrilled. The only reason that someone like Donald Trump would run for president is ego, period. And he probably never thought he would win. I mean, even Donald Trump might have overestimated the intelligence of the American electorate, which is incredibly dangerous to do. I don't know if you remember this, but Stephanie Sigelski is a former advisor to Trump. And she actually came clean during the campaign and said when she met Trump at the beginning, the goal was get him to place second respectably, right? With like a respectable amount of support, which would have been great for his public recognition. It would have been great for his business deals. It probably would have been great in a number of ways for his life. And that ultimately didn't happen. And part of it might have been that everybody overestimated the intelligence of the American electorate. And at the same time, the Trumps probably didn't realize it would actually be this bad because this is the highest standard that they've ever been held to. We've talked about how when Trump said he would run the country like a business, a lot of that meant he does whatever he wants with very little scrutiny. There aren't repercussions to what he does. He is just the buck stops with him in every way on every issue. And now you've got investigations, media scrutiny of his business deals, media scrutiny of Twitter accounts, of business relationships, of personal relationships, everything. And in the end, they chose to be involved with Russia in this campaign. They chose to lie about endless issues every step of the way. I don't feel bad for them. They brought this on themselves. You know, the young kids that, I mean, I'm guessing Barron wasn't involved in the decision as to whether to run or not. We know that Trump's adult children are some of his closest and most trusted advisors. Clearly, they were involved to some degree in this. And it's also interesting that in this report that we've read, the source who is in the circle with the Trump children said, quote, "You can't bite the hand that feeds you, but Don Jr. can't wait for these 4 years to be over." 4 years is an interesting part of the commentary, right? Because Donald Trump filed for re-election the day he was inaugurated. People have been donating to his re-election campaign since Inauguration Day. We've since learned that some of those donations are being funneled to pay for Donald Trump Jr.'s legal representation, which is actually a scandal in and of itself that is basically like on the 10th page of the list of scandals at this point because they're endless. I wonder if the writing is on the wall in terms of Trump and his reelection, because this friend said not they can't wait for 8 years to be over, they can't wait for 4 years to be over, and that there could be meaning there. I've been talking about the ideological commitment of some Maybe many Trumpists, and there's a new poll that stunningly confirms this. Even though Donald Trump Jr. has admitted to meeting with the Russian lawyer Natalia Veselnitskaya in Trump Tower, only 45% of Trump voters actually believe that that meeting took place. Trump Jr. admitted that the meeting took place. He admitted that he was told he was going to get damaging dirt about Hillary Clinton. There's no denying that it took place whatsoever. And most Trumpists still don't believe that it took place. According to the same PPP poll, 32% of Trump voters say the meeting never happened, and 24% aren't sure. A minority of Trump voters believe that the meeting that Donald Trump Jr. admitted to actually took place. Remember that Trump's own emails provide written evidence that Russia wanted to help Donald Trump win the election, yet somehow only 26% of Trump voters are willing to admit that. And this might be the most bizarre result from this poll. 44% of Trump voters believe that Russia wanted Hillary Clinton to win the election, something that is completely outrageous in its total lack of evidence. Even if it was discovered that Trump did collude with Russia definitively in some kind of legal, investigated way, only 16% of Trump voters believe that Trump should resign as a result of that. And that's why, there's this cult of personality. The entire I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and people would still support me thing. We might actually see Trump get away with whatever it is that took place because there does not seem to be much of a desire from Trumpists to actually hold him accountable for any of this stuff. The only people that I expect less of than Donald Trump are Trump supporters. And every single poll that comes out about this is supporting that. It didn't matter to them that Donald Trump said, hey, I grab him by the pussy when I want. It didn't matter to them that Donald Trump is a sexual predator or made fun of a disabled reporter or that he lies constantly. So I guess it shouldn't be shocking to us that very few Trumpists are saying, even if Russian collusion is proven, Donald Trump still shouldn't resign. And this is why I am skeptical about the actions that will be taken by Republicans. I don't know what we're ultimately going to find out beyond any reasonable doubt as a result of the multiple investigations into Trump collusion with Russia, money laundering, obstruction of justice, the cover-up, whatever. Why would Republicans actually take action if there's no desire, even from the most committed Trumpists, for any repercussions? If Donald Trump has done the worst of what he's accused of having done, why would you act in that way? And this is why, although if Trump's approval rating stays low or drops even more, that might be a reason that Republicans would start to bail on Trump. But at the same time, if polls are telling us that Trumpists don't even care if the guy colluded with Russia, and they don't even believe the stuff that Trump Jr. has admitted to doing, why would they go out on a limb if it comes to that point and say, yeah, let's move to impeach the president? It's not looking good. And by the way, in the background, this is why Democrats need a platform now for 2018. And we might, when we take calls, maybe we'll get some calls about this. Democrats need a platform. And waiting around for Trump Russia to implode, whether it will or won't implode, it's not a good idea. And Democrats need a strategy. They need a platform. I've been talking about it. And you can talk about it with me on Twitter. I'm on Twitter at @dpacman. Follow me there. Send me your thoughts about this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Randy Little. Randy, thank you for being a member. We depend on the support of members like Randy Little, and you can join him at davidpakman.com/membership. The coupon code is IVoted17. Let's go to the phone, 617-830-4750. We're going to go to our caller from the 915 area code. Caller from 915, tell us who you are, where you're calling from, and what's on your mind today.
Oh, yeah, I'm Adrian. I'm calling from El Paso, Texas.
Great. What's
So
up?
I was just wondering, in reference to Hannah Arendt's Origins of Totalitarianism, in which she stated that the ideal subject of totalitarian rule is not the convinced Nazi or the dedicated communist, but from whom the distinction between fact and fiction, true and false, no longer exists. And given the current state of this whole fake news phenomenon, do you think that the U.S. government should step in and find news outlets that spread false information that can easily be negated by objective truth?
Well, listen, first of all, it's the U.S. government that has created this frenzy over so-called fake news. So the last thing I would do is appoint the government of determining what's fake and what's real news. But to Hannah Arendt's point, it's so related to the world that is described in Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, right? Which is not the government controls the messaging and is propaganda or whatever the case may be, although there's certainly plenty of government propaganda. It's that it becomes impossible to know what is real and what is not. And it is within that confusion that so many bad things, very serious things, as the president likes to say, are able to take place. So I think that there's a really good connection there. I mean, as far as the government just stepping in and saying, here is the approved list of media outlets, that is an absolute and total disaster. I don't think that's a good idea, Adrian. I mean, I don't know if you were asking hypothetically or rhetorically, or if you think that that might be a good thing.
Yeah, I was just asking hypothetically.
Okay, yeah, no, I would be against the Trump administration or any government deciding who are the real news outlets. Adrian, thank you. Very important question, particularly in 2017 Trump's America. Let's continue on the phones at 617-830-4750. Our next caller is from the 443 area code. Caller from 443. Tell us who you are, where you're calling from, and what your question is today.
Hi, my name is Dougie. I'm from White Plains. I'm just kind of curious. I don't listen to the show very often, but I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on the kind of rhetoric about the Democratic Party not having any message beyond "We're not Trump." I think that's kind of unfair, given that the Republicans didn't really have much of a message in 2009. So that's my question.
Well, listen, I've been critical of the lack of messaging from Democrats. I think that there are elements of a platform from the Democratic Party, but there's a couple of different problems. Number one is that there is a sort of rift that has taken place on the left since the election. Part of it is because there are factions that are divided over whether Trump-Russia determines the legitimacy of how good or bad of a candidate Hillary Clinton was, or whether Bernie got screwed by the DNC. And I've talked extensively about how I think that that split is really counterproductive. Separately, however, earlier this week, I reported about how donors are already loving, reportedly, Kamala Harris, the California senator for 2020, and what a disaster it is that you already have donor excitement and money pouring in to Kamala Harris when we're not even thinking about the 2018 midterms, which is really where Democrats need to be focusing right now, And part of that is having a coherent platform. So I think that, Dougie, it's a fair criticism that the Democratic Party is not on message in terms of a platform. At the same time, I don't believe that it's just the time to throw the Democratic Party into the trash, because let's be honest, we all can get behind the idea of third parties. But until we have real campaign finance reform, and I would argue ranked choice voting, you're not going to see at the national level third parties make a significant impact. So I think there's fair criticisms, Dougie, of the Democratic Party that are not hyperbolic. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, Dougie. Thank you very much. Appreciate the call. Important and relevant topic. Got to be thinking about 2018, though. Please, we've got to don't lose sight of the ball at this point. Let's go to our next caller from the 253 area code. Caller from 253, introduce yourself. Tell me what is on your mind today.
Hey, David. My name is also David, and I'm from Washington State.
All right.
And I have a question about what you think about the Republicans and repealing Obamacare.
Mm-hmm.
So as you know, they've been trying to do it, and they sort of think they're obligated to do it because Trump and others campaigned on it.
Yeah.
But it seems like now that they've been trying to repeal it, it sort of brought more people's attention to what the ACA actually does and what it is.
Yep.
And now more people have realized maybe it isn't as bad as the Republicans have been saying it is for the last 8 years. And so now the Republicans think they should get rid of Obamacare, even though their constituents don't really seem to want them to. So my question is, what do you think is worse for the Republicans going into 2018 and 2020?
Right.
To go through with repealing Obamacare or not to?
I have said a couple of times now, including earlier this week, that if Republicans ultimately don't repeal Obamacare, that there will be some political liability because it's a promise that they failed to meet. However, you're spot on, David, in realizing that actually repealing it will cause tens of millions of people to end up without health insurance. And the repercussions of that, the political liability of that, could well be way bigger than not keeping a campaign promise. I mean, let's be honest. A wall that Mexico is going to pay for, it's not going to happen. Very, very long list of campaign promises that won't happen. Not repealing Obamacare will be yet another campaign promise not met. And I think that the fallout from that will not be nearly as bad as what will happen if they actually repeal Obamacare and then tens of millions of people end up without insurance. So I think that Republicans are actually better off. Not that I'm giving them advice, right? But I think that they are politically better off not repealing the Affordable Care Act, especially since, even though it's a completely bogus assertion, you'll be able to convince some Trumpists that you weren't able to do it because of Democrats. I mean, yeah, you control the House, Senate, and the White House, but some Trumpists are low information enough that they'll believe it's the fault of the Democrats that they won't repeal it.
Right, even though the Democrats weren't involved in crafting the bill or never even had a chance to vote on it.
Absolutely. It was Republicans that couldn't get on the same page. All right, David, thanks so much for the call. Sounds like you've got a whole thing going on there, so I'll let you go. But I do appreciate the call. Very, very important topic. And we're going to be talking about healthcare a lot, I predict, over the next several years. Caller in 607. What's your name? Where are you calling from? And what's on your mind today?
Hello, this is Caleb from Newark Valley, New York, and I have a question about the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Do you think that Justice Kennedy would retire, and what do you think about the thing about the travel ban?
In relation to his retirement?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's certainly been floated that Justice Kennedy might be retiring. Whether the timing will be, what the timing will be in relation to the travel ban hearing, I don't know. Justice Kennedy is often sort of like the swing vote in the Supreme Court. And as a result, if you anticipate a 5-4 decision on the travel ban, it's reasonable to suggest that Kennedy could be the decision maker. He could be the fifth in that. However, I want to throw something else out there, which is that the Supreme Court hearing on the travel ban may end up being completely moot, because remember that the travel ban was a 90-day temporary ban, and those 90 days will have expired by the time the Supreme Court is actually set to discuss this. So there is some speculation that the Supreme Court might say, hey, you know what? This is moot because this has expired, and that's sort of it. We'll take up any subsequent case on its merits if there's another ban proposed that is not a 90-day thing or whatever the case may be. So you're thinking multidimensionally. I think that that's a good thing, but I don't know ultimately that the timing of the travel ban hearing and Justice Kennedy's retirement will swing whatever the results are.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much for the call. Really appreciate it. Very, very good to hear from people with questions about the Supreme Court. 301 area code. Caller from 301. I hope you can hear me. What's your name? Where are you calling from? Yes. Hello.
Hi, I'm calling from Maryland.
Okay. What's on your mind today?
And I wanted to ask if you think Al Franken would be a good candidate for the 2020 election.
I think that it is too early to talk about 2020, and no, I don't think he would be. I mean, I think that I don't think so. I think that I like Al Franken a lot. I think that he is someone who has actually been one of the stronger progressive voices in the Senate, up there with some of the more progressive senators. But I think that political viability for Al Franken is a tough thing. But if Trump won, who am I to say, Pat, that Al Franken couldn't win?
Right. Do you oppose Al Franken because of his former celebrity
No.
status, being an SNL
No.
guy?
I mean, listen, on the politics of it, I think Al Franken is a great candidate. Do I think that he's the best person to be put forward by the Democratic Party in 2020? I don't think so. Maybe I could be swayed, but I think we've got to focus on 2018 right now anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it. Interesting noises on that call.
Yeah.
I don't know what that was a very, very odd noise.
I'm just thinking now about what the debates would be like between Donald Trump and Al Franken. I
Yeah.
mean, for entertainment value alone,
Yeah.
I think those would rank very high.
They would. They would. Let's go to back to the 617 area code. Different possible local caller. Caller from 617. What is your name? Where are you calling from? And what's on your mind today?
Hi, David. It's me, Terry. Can you hear me?
We can hear you fine, Terry. Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Hello? Oh, okay, good. Just wanted to make sure. I just wanted to call about the Jane Sanders investigation.
Right.
Because it looks like the feds are trying to look into her conduct over the way she operated the Burlington College with regards to the specific loan and all that. And I know a lot of progressives have been saying that this is somehow a political witch hunt and all that too. And I think that it's not going to go anywhere, but I'm nonetheless a bit worried because the way that she did the loan application is a little bit fishy. And I just want to know what you kind of think.
I believe that it is not going to go anywhere. It's been revealed that the entire Jane Sanders thing is effectively premised on hearsay, and that it appears to be sort of a deliberate attempt to just say, hey, everybody's under investigation. Everybody's equally wrapped up in all sorts of sketchy stuff. I think that if there's anything there, from everything I know right now, I believe that it is sort of like an administrative or bureaucratic questions, if anything, and I don't think it's going to go anywhere. But you know what? I'm not ideologically committed to anything, and if I hear or if I see other evidence, Terry, then I'll revise my thoughts on it. But I think it's going nowhere.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right, no problem at all. And on that note, we will wrap up calls for this week. Thanks to everybody who called. Very, very much appreciated. And on that note, we will go to a break. We will take calls again. That I promise you, folks. Believe me.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
If you are a David Pakman Show member, you might remember that earlier this week we did a story about how if you take a step back from the federal poverty line and really think about what it would mean for a family to be in poverty in the United States, that we're actually close to half of the country in poverty. And I thought that this week for our classic interview, we would go back to January of 2015 when I interviewed Zach Ingrasci, who did a great documentary on extreme poverty. And when we talk about poverty, we're talking about people in the United States who don't have enough money for food. We're also talking about people in what is called extreme poverty, living on less than $1 a day. And that is exactly what Zach's documentary dealt with. It is still an incredibly important issue, not only in the United States, but around the world. So let's go back to my interview from 2015 with Zach Ingrasci. Take a look at this. I'm joined today by Zach Ingrasci, one of the producers, filmmakers of the documentary film Living on $1. Zach, let's start for people who maybe aren't familiar with the film. I saw it last week. Tell our audience a little bit about what you guys did.
Absolutely. So Living on $1 follows our journey as we live in this rural village in Guatemala on less than $1 a day. And although it follows our own experience living at that level, it also takes an intimate look at our neighbors' lives, specifically three amazing people, Rosa, Chino, and Anthony.
So this originally started out as some viral YouTube videos, and then eventually, if I understand the story correctly, you turned this into more of a full-length documentary. What was it that people were saying? What was the reaction to the short YouTube clips first?
Well, so this was, like you said, was never meant to be a feature-length documentary. You know, we at the time were students studying poverty and kept hearing the statistic that 1.1 billion people live on less than $1 a day. And, you know, growing up in Seattle, Chris grew up in Connecticut, we had no context for what does that really mean. So while we were going through this experience in Guatemala, we were uploading these video blogs to YouTube. And we quickly found out that, you know, everyone around the world, especially back in the States, felt this same disconnect. And I think it's really, you know, being able to see through film into this you know, very different reality that hooked people into it. And we actually, like you said, had over 1 million views on YouTube, which inspired us to create the feature-length film.
I want to get to talking a little more specifically about the difference between kind of what we might consider developed nation poverty and what you guys are talking about, which is people living on $1 or less a day. But before we get to that, you know, I started watching the film and it popped up on Netflix. The concept struck me as interesting. And I'll tell you this because ultimately I thought that it was really well done. In the first 5 minutes, I started having somewhat of a negative reaction, or I'll say the first 5 minutes that you guys were actually down in Guatemala. And I said, you know, I'm getting the feeling that these guys are seeing this sort of like a game of being transported into this world that really isn't their world, and knowing that anytime they want, they can just fly back to the United States. And I would say 10 minutes later, it started getting very real, and the way that you guys actually involved yourselves in the local communities, it was very clear from the film that it was not a sort of kind of privileged yuppies going on, you know, a brief vacation to see how poor people live. A lot of the experiences hit you guys pretty hard, didn't they?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, I remember this one morning that we woke up on the dirt floor, and you know, we were sleeping on the dirt floor, as many people in this community were, and getting bit by fleas every night. And I woke up, and that day, you know, we didn't even have enough money for food, let alone medicine to treat. Chris at the time was suffering from giardia, which it's a parasite you get from the drinking water there, because you're actually getting the water out of a pipe out of the side of the hill. And it just hit us so hard that, you know, all of our neighbors who work in this informal economy, on average make less than $1 a day, it's such a difficult thing to manage that small amount of money to not only pay for your food, but for your medicine, for your kids' education, for all of these costs that we deal with every day back in the States. But, you know, they have to be incredibly innovative to manage that amount of money to survive.
And to replicate that, correct me if I'm wrong, you guys, to replicate the kind of uncertainty in terms of you might average $1 a day over a month, but you might not be getting $1 every day. Talk to us about how you guys simulated that.
Right. So the statistic is really misleading, actually. So this $1 a day statistic, you know, it's actually an average over a year. So it comes from the fact that most people work in the informal economy. So they might, you know, someday they might have work. 1 week they might not have work. You know, people are working as farmers. They're working as day laborers. So what we did is we took our $56 each. We were there for 56 days. And we split that into random numbers between 0 and 9. And then we would draw from a hat each day that number. That would be our income for the day. And you know, some days we would draw very low numbers, and there was a week where we were actually living on less than 12 cents a day. And what this replicated was, you know, that people living in extreme poverty have very irregular incomes. And like I said before, they have to be very innovative to manage that amount of money. And that's something that really surprised us. And people in this community were actually using all these informal tools. One of our friends was using a savings group. So he'd get together with 12 of his friends. Each week they would put in $10, and one person would take home that $120. And that $120, that lump sum of money, would allow them to invest in things like a stove and different things. They used all these different techniques to manage that tiny amount of money to actually survive.
And in seeing the film, what you guys did, I think, a great job of showing is when you're at this level of income, an extra dollar a day can represent an increase of 100% of your income. So I think that that's hard for people in the kind of developed world who are not living in poverty to even wrap their minds around, which is that second dollar can be life altering for so many people when it represents 100% or maybe even more of their daily income.
Absolutely. And it should be incredibly empowering for us, because if we can provide people with the opportunity to raise their income by $1 each day, so they're making $2 a day, like you said, that's doubling their income. And a lot of times, you know, we think of things in such huge steps. How do we move someone completely out of poverty tomorrow? But the reality is, these incremental changes, these small impacts in someone's life can create huge change in their life. And I think one of the best examples of this is this woman named Rosa, who's actually one of the stars of our film. And in the 6th grade, she had to drop out of elementary school because her father became sick, and she had to help provide for her family. But she had this dream of becoming a nurse, and she wouldn't let that dream go. And she ended up starting a weaving business with a tiny loan of $200 from a microfinance bank, which loans directly to people in extreme poverty and specifically tailored to their needs. And with that loan and this business, she was able to put herself back through school and is actually on her way to becoming a nurse. And this little $200 loan that normally we would totally take for granted, $200 isn't too much, she was actually able to double her income and be able to afford to put herself back through school and pursue this dream that she's had for her whole life.
When we think about, to get back to what we were talking about a little earlier, when we think about this level of extreme poverty, $1 a day or so, do you get the sense that many people, when they think about poverty, it's this sort of amorphous blob where developed nation below the federal poverty line poverty is kind of bunched in with people that are living on $1 a day, as if they're all sort of equally poor? Do you get a sense that that happens sometimes?
Yeah, I think, even from my own experience, that happens. And the reality is, poverty in every country has a different face. There are different causes. People have access to different resources, don't have access to different resources. And, it's a very personal thing. I mean, even in this community of Peña Blanca, each one of our neighbors faced a very different challenge just because of the situation that they were in. Some people couldn't pay for their kids to go to school. Some people might have had, became sick, and that created this downward spiral. And like you were saying, the type of poverty we're seeing in rural Guatemala looks very different even than the poverty in cities in Guatemala. And then that looks even very different than poverty we see in the United States. People face very different challenges. The biggest being in rural Guatemala, a lot of people just don't have access to very, very basic needs like enough food. A lot of people were just eating rice and tortillas every day. Whereas in the United States, you tend not to see quite that level of food insecurity. A lot of times people are facing, much bigger social issues, less access to quality education or quality work, even, have security issues with gangs or the neighborhoods they're living in. So these issues that people are facing are very different.
And not to say that, of course, there isn't significant food insecurity in the U.S., but it's different, and there's no question that the film does a good job of kind of pointing that out. Last thing in the brief few minutes we have left here, the generosity of the people that you guys encountered, to me, was absolutely amazing. And we're talking, like the subject of the film is, people who are living on very little money, who still went out of their way, seemingly, to feed you guys and be generous with you guys.
Absolutely. The community in Peña Blanca was absolutely incredible. And, we learned so much from them. We were brought into people's homes. They were so generous with their time and their energy. And we've actually been back every year since we created the film. We have an update video coming out about the life of Rosa, who I mentioned earlier before. She's incredibly inspirational, which you can check out at our website, livingon1.org. And, it's a home away from home from us. It's somewhere that we will always go back to, and pretty special place.
We've been speaking with Zach Ingrasci. As he mentioned, the website is livingon1.org, and the film, which I highly recommend, is Living on $1. Zach, thanks so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We've got some great questions this week. First one is from Nate. Nate said, hey, when did you realize you weren't a kid anymore? I have two types of answer for this. One is more in terms of responsibilities. The other is more of a physical thing. I once sneezed while sort of angled weirdly, and it caused me to basically have neck pain for a week. And at that point, I realized I'm probably starting to get old. And now whenever I sneeze, I make sure that I'm not in any kind of angled position that might make my head snap at a weird angle. And I look straight ahead when I sneeze now. That was probably a sign where I was like, yeah, now I understand why when you fall as an adult, it's not like when you fall as a kid.
Who thought that sneezing could be such a coming of age moment for you? And I'm sure you had to sneeze at that awkward angle because maybe you were being considerate of everyone else around you.
Naturally.
You may not show that same consideration when you're just a few years old.
That's true too. Yeah, the fact that I found it so important not to sneeze on other people was probably also a sign. Now, I'm sure that as a result of that, it's clearly evidence of me being a beta male cuck. I realize because only beta male cucks would ever hurt their necks by sneezing. But hey, this is full honesty and transparency. That wasn't about to be leaked by the New York Times, so I didn't do like the Trump Jr. thing where now I'll be transparent about it. That was one that I could have kept secret for a long time, but I'm sharing it with you in the audience. From a responsibility perspective, I think that there were numerous instances. One was when I had some kind of financial thing happen with a wire that I sent and then it wasn't received, and it was related to some service I had, and then like the service was going to get canceled, and it was like, wow, yeah, there's no more sort of like parent around. I'm sort of like on my own with this when I was like 21 or something like that. And then that's just been a process of sort of like, hey, I'm responsible for my own health insurance now. I'm no longer on my parents' health insurance. Financially, I think there's a lot of moments at which you sort of realize, oh yeah, I'm not a kid anymore.
I felt this way when I was 18 and being dropped off at college, because I remember my parents drove me out there with all of my stuff and we went out to lunch, and I was just thinking, you know, they're just going to leave. And I'm going to be here in this city on my own. I can pretty much do whatever I want. I get to meet all these new people. And yes, you know, you're only 18. You still are fully reliant on them at that age. Most people are anyway. But I felt that way for sure.
Well, another one for me that's college related is every year I go back a couple times and will lecture in some class at my undergraduate alma mater, the University of Massachusetts. The freshmen look like little kids now. They really, and that at first I was like, yeah, I'm 22, 23. Everybody still sort of looks the same age. I'm 24, 25. Yeah, if I show up at a bar, I'm not really noticeably older. These people sort of still look like my peers. Now when I show up and I see 18-year-old freshmen, they look like little kids. And that, I think, is a testament to the fact that I'm not a kid anymore.
Well, maybe we're just aging at a slower rate. You know, life expectancies are going up. You'd have to imagine that we're not showing signs of age as early anymore.
Another one would be meeting people and very quickly noticing whether or not they have a wedding band on. And just sort of like, it's so
you're looking
common
for that now.
It's so common that people that I meet that are my age are married that I very quickly look at that in addition to whatever else you might look at to figure out sort of like, oh, what's the deal with this person type of thing.
That's interesting because my friends and I will have these conversations about, you know, you want to pick up a girl, you got to make sure that she doesn't have a wedding band on on her finger. That's the age that you got to start looking out for those things.
Absolutely, absolutely. So anyway, those are some thoughts. There's probably others. I think that there's more that I'm skipping, but those are some of the main ones. Good one, Nate. Comment, by the way, if you're watching on YouTube or if you're listening, go to YouTube and leave a comment on this video with when you realized you weren't a kid anymore, unless you still are, because we actually do have a lot of people under 18 who watch the show. Fernando wrote in, what would happen if we extended human lifespans to 500 years or even 1,000? Well, We spoke to Aubrey de Grey about this earlier in the week, and there's a lot of frantic hyperbole about what would happen if we extended human lifespans. And then there's also more sort of calm voices. I think Aubrey de Grey would be one. I still believe the risk aversion that we talked about with Aubrey de Grey is an issue, but not as big of an issue as it's sometimes made out to be. Because, as an example, if you're 30 versus 70, driving in a car has a certain amount of risk, right? You're more likely to die driving in a car than you are getting on a commercial plane. I don't know people whose willingness to get in a car based on the probability of being in a car accident is different when they're 30 or when they're 70. Now, you could say, well, David, that's because even though it's way more likely that you would die in a car accident than on a plane, it's still on any given car ride very unlikely statistically that you would get killed. So it's not a very good example. But I think when you apply it to most areas of life, I don't observe people being drastically different in terms of their risk aversion when they're 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, unless significant changes have taken place to their life circumstances. So maybe a 500-year lifespan would sort of become the norm and it wouldn't affect risk aversion.
So that's interesting because I remember George H.W. Bush will skydive on these monumentous birthdays. Like I think he did it at 80, 85, 90 even.
Maybe.
And would he be willing to do that if he was expected to live another 400 years? Maybe so, but maybe not. I mean, skydiving's not too incredibly risky or anything, but
I actually don't know how safe it is.
Yeah.
It seems dangerous, but you don't really hear too often about people dying doing it, although maybe you don't hear about it often because it's so dangerous that it's sort of expected. Like, yeah, people are going to die doing it. It's not that weird. The one thing I do think would require a sort of reframing for people would be careers and finances. If one could live 500 years, instead of maybe having, for the average person working for a significant period of time in 2, maybe 3 fields during their life, maybe it would be much more common that you go through 8 or 10 very different fields. You go back to college when you're 100 and you go back again when you're 200 and you sort of start over and go into a drastically different field. And that relates to economics as well, because when you think now about the power of compound interest and how much savings early, which will translate to in dollars available at retirement, if you're talking about a couple hundred years in accrued cumulative interest, every $10 you spend now has a much greater impact later in life.
Yeah, you would not be able to retire at the age of 62 anymore, that's for sure. I was thinking about that one too, because, I have no interest in becoming, say, a lawyer or a doctor, what have you. I don't think anyone wants me performing surgeries on them. I think that's fair to say.
Not as an unlicensed doctor, anyway.
No. But if I was to live another few hundred years, I think I would definitely go back to school and become much more well-rounded, have all these different careers under my belt.
I think so. Of course, in 200 years, it would cost $350,000 a year to go to Pat's alma mater of Suffolk University. So that would probably be a financial consideration as well.
Yes.
I think those are some of the major shifts that would take place if human lifespans were drastically extended. And also, I think willingness to go through certain medical procedures would change, right? Because if you have a procedure that you evaluate at age 60 based on how many years you're likely to live and how intense the recovery would be and how much benefit you would get from it, your calculation might be different if you expect to live 90 years versus if you expect to live 200 years in terms of what medical procedures you might tolerate.
Are you talking about like something like a knee transplant,
Sure.
a knee replacement,
Maybe.
or something like a heart transplant? 'Cause
Either.
there's a big span in that.
Whatever. I think it would just, for all medical considerations, it would be a factor. Life expectancy being so drastically different would be a factor in terms of thinking about what procedures do you want, which procedures are worth it financially, which in the U.S. is a consideration. Sandy wrote in, what products prey on the ignorant or uninformed? I have so many. I mean, we could do an entire hour on this, but generally speaking, I'm not going to dwell on the ones I've talked about before. Homeopathy, total scam. Chiropractic is a scam. All sorts of pseudoscience. It definitely disproportionately is preying on people who are ignorant or uninformed about that particular issue. I think donating to megachurches is a real way to prey on the ignorant or uninformed and funding these extravagant lifestyles for supposed mostly men of God, not that many women pastoring these megachurches. I think that payday loans are an insane scam, and they are preying
I hesitate to say that they're preying just on the ignorant or uninformed. I mean, they're really preying on people who are in a situation where they might need a loan merely to make it to the next paycheck. However, if you are poor, you're more likely not to understand how the interest rates they give you are weekly or monthly, and what it translates to in terms of an annual interest rate and just the highway robbery that it represents. I think that that's a big thing. Pawn shops are sort of along the same way in which they prey on people. I mean, those are some of the ones that come to mind for me.
And I'm noticing some trends too, because when it comes to, supplements or homeopathy, that really gets at your health. With these quick loans, it goes to your finances. Maybe you need to survive to get to your next paycheck.
Yeah.
Or with these big religious institutions, mega churches and what have you, I think it goes to this idea of promising you an afterlife.
Sure.
So these are all things that are not just wants necessarily. Some of them are needs.
That's true. That's true. And I think along those lines, that's why some of the phishing and scam emails work, where if you're relatively informed, you're not going to fall for an email that says, Barrister Mumbwange Ubuntu from Nigeria wants to give you $4 million, but you just need to FedEx them 30,000 or 3,000 in cash.
I'm not falling for that again.
Or whatever the case. But the ones where your banking information may have been compromised, please click here to log in again. And it looks like the Wells Fargo website, but it's not. That also, if you are in a more financially precarious situation, then you might be more likely to do something like that for fear that your last $200 might disappear from your account or something like that. Whereas if you're not in that financial situation, you might have more time to say, let me think this through, let me talk to someone, that type of thing.
There's also those IRS scams where regardless of how much money you have, you may just feel in fear of breaking the law or going away to federal prison somewhere, and you'll just give up the money, not realizing that those people actually don't work for the IRS and you're not in trouble.
What about penis enlargement pills?
Yeah.
Is there a bigger scam than that? Listen, these work, but you've got to take them 3 times a day for 2 years before you start to notice a change. Now, by then you'll be in for $2,000 or $3,000 into the pills, of course, by the time you realize they don't work. That also is directly preying on the uninformed, isn't it?
It seems like Alex Jones may market a lot of these products.
He has male vitality pills, which will increase brain clarity and your ability to blah, 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 blah. It's a long list. We could do an hour on scam products, but those are some of them. Good question on that, Sandy. Send me your thoughts. What are the biggest scam products or services that prey on the ignorant or uninformed? We've got a fantastic bonus show for you today. DavidPakman.com/membership is how you sign up. Get instant access. If you get access to the bonus show, then this isn't the last segment of the week. Otherwise it is, and we'll talk to you on Monday.
The David Pakman Show at DavidPakman.com.